January the 15th was the high point in U.S. China relations for 2020. After years of tense negotiations, Vice Premier Liu He and his negotiating team were here at the White House to sign a Phase 1 trade deal. Reading from a letter from Chinese President Xi Jinping, Liu He said the deal was not only good for China and the U.S., but also good for the world. And U.S. President Trump praised the U.S. relationship with China.
Now our efforts have yielded a transformative deal that will bring tremendous benefits to both countries. We have a great relationship with China. We have a great relationship with the leadership of China.
But then came COVID-19. China quickly contained it and conquered the virus, while the U.S. response was slow and haphazard. Then China emerged as a scapegoat in a presidential election year.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Your own aide, Secretary Azar, says he does not use this term. He says ethnicity does not cause the virus. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all.
In April, the U.S. also pointed the finger at the World Health Organization, claiming the WHO was too focused on China and issued bad advice on the virus outbreak. By midsummer, Trump officially withdrew the U.S. from the WHO and potentially pulled hundreds of millions of dollars of funding during a pandemic. China rejected all the unfounded accusations.
American politicians have repeatedly ignored the truth and have been telling barefaced lies. They only have one objective: shirk their responsibility for their own poor academic prevention and control measures and divert public attention. But the facts speak louder than words. And justice naturally inhabits a man's heart. Their plot can never succeed.
Trump's finger-pointing at China opened the door for the so-called China hawks in the administration and the U.S. Congress to pursue a more aggressive policy against Beijing. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo launched a campaign that aimed to blame the Chinese Communist Party for many of the world's problems and called for an alliance against Beijing. In July, Pompeo ordered the closure of the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas, on unfounded allegations of spying. China responded by ordering the closure of the U.S. consulate in Chengdu, Sichuan. A whole government approach was launched against China. The Trump administration banned 5G leader Huawei from doing business in the U.S. and sought to cut off its supply chain of advanced semiconductors and pressured allies in Asia and Europe to do the same, with limited success. A campaign against Chinese social media platforms was also launched. With 100 million users in the US, TikTok was the first target. Spurious conspiratorial claims reminiscent of the 1950s McCarthy era were spread across the nation with no evidence.
These are not innocent social apps. They are used to basically steal personal and financial data from individuals.
China rejected Navarro's comments, calling out the Trump administration's most vocal critic of China by name.
The U.S. boasts of its strong values, but why is it so afraid of a social media liked by young people for easily sharing entertainment videos? It's so fragile. I think this is a question worth pondering over. I hope Navarro and his colleagues, as well as the officials of the United States, should seriously consider this.
U.S. President Trump ordered the sale of TikTok to U.S. tech companies, at one point even demanding a cut of the proceeds. An agreed sale to software maker Oracle and retail giant Walmart has languished as the U.S. courts have sided with TikTok. Similar efforts to ban WeChat in the U.S. have also been rejected by U.S. courts. But things got personal too. Chinese students in the U.S. were accused of being spies. Visas in high-tech study areas restricted. Chinese media personnel were placed under strict limits. Some had to return home. And Chinese cultural centers like the Confucius Institutes labeled as tools of propaganda. Universities were pressured to shut them down and examine all sources of income from China. The Trump administration also stepped up interference in China's internal affairs. Sanctions over Chinese treatments of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Sanctions, too, against mainland officials and businesses in the Hong Kong region after the introduction of a national security law. The White House imposing sanctions over Hong Kong as it tear-gassed demonstrators at home was a contradiction not lost on Hong Kong officials.
For those foreign governments or politicians raising objections to the legislation, one could only lament the double standards they are adopting. All those countries which have pointed their fingers at China have their own national security legislation in place. We could think of no valid reason why China alone should be inhibited from enacting national security legislation to protect every corner of its territory and all of its nationals.
Perhaps most destabilizing for the U.S. China relationship was the Trump administration's policy of closer ties with the Taiwan region. Stepped up diplomatic contacts, increased arms sales, and openly questioning the One China principle, which has been the foundation of the U.S.-China relationship over the past 4 decades, has increased military and diplomatic tensions across the Taiwan Strait. Washington's moves to also secure closer military relationships with India, Australia and Japan, the so-called Quad, has also raised questions in Beijing over whether Washington is seeking to contain China's rise in its own region. After the most turbulent 4 years in the U.S.-China relationship since diplomatic relations were established back in the 1970s, all eyes, of course, now on the incoming Biden administration. Some in his foreign policy team are saying that they would like to restore cooperation on global issues such as climate change. Cooperation and competition may be the watchwords of the new administration, not outright confrontation. But given a year of anti-Chinese rhetoric and action across the United States, there are many in the US Congress and beyond that will resist furiously any rapprochement with Beijing. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.